Okay guys, let's continue our session and now let's code. After we use configure platform to upsert two different configurations like API port and app port, now I'm going to introduce you to my application. I have a monorepo here with an API and an app. This is basically what I need in order to run my application. Let's just demonstrate the environment. So when I run npm dev, you can see that I have an API on port 3000 and a UI on some random port. Okay, let's move on. In order to start using configure in my application to make it more convenient, I created a .configure file. My configure file, I am adding the description of my store, which is basically a configure store. I am logged into my organization, configure demo workspace. I have a schema file on my monorepo.cfgu.yaml. We can go here and I will just describe the configurations that I'm using in order to run my application. I have an API port and an app port. I can have more configurations here like required and other tests or any sort of validations, but let's start with the basic. Now after I configure the .configure file and my CFGU file that describe the environment variables that I need, I can run configure login. Configure login will make the initial login, create a token so I can use in order to eval and upsert. Let's continue to the next phase. We have a command called configure eval. In my configure eval, you can see that I'm using the store flag. The store is based on the name that I mentioned here. It's using the store that I mentioned. Okay. The configuration of stores, you can put multiple stores and even multiple types of stores. Like for example, you can create your own SQL database, Mongo or file system store, retrieve configurations from a CSV or any type of file that you have. You can also create your own custom store and basically specify a TypeScript file that export a getter and a setter. You can retrieve configurations from there. I am mentioning the set. You can see that I mentioned development app, but I can basically use the development set. I am also mentioning the schema. The schema is app. I can have multiple schemas. My schema contains the API port and the app port because I don't want to retrieve all of the configurations from the store. I just want to use whatever I need and I want the validation close to my source code, which is basically make sure that I can retrieve the configurations that I need and those configurations are also passing the validations that I wrote near my code. Running the eval will, as you can see, create an object with all of the metadata of the configurations. I can see the values of those configurations. And now let's see how to export them. After using configure eval, I can basically pipe the result of that command into configure export. And in configure export, I can mention the format. Format can be a .env, but it can also be any other known type format that you know, like Terraform values or Helm values or Kubernetes config map or anything you like. If I want to create a .env file, I can use a terminal to create a .env and it will generate the environment variables that is coming from configure platform. I want to specify another key, a token. I am just specifying this key. I will run the same command. I'll get an empty value. Inside my CFGU file, I can also specify other options to make sure that I'm getting the relevant values. And now you can see that the validation failed. Okay, token is required and now it just won't work. That's great. That will make my life easier when I'm getting a new configuration, and it will also fail the CI step if I'm running it in my CI pipelines. See you in my next video to view another example of the configure export command.